Right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Prerna Bondra, and I am with the Ananta Center. I'm delighted to welcome you all to a special session, India-UAE Relations, Breaking New Ground. We are honored to have with us today His Excellency Dr. Ahmed A R Albanna, the Ambassador of the United Arab Emirates to India. A very warm welcome to you, Ambassador. The India-UAE bilateral relationship is vital for both countries, and there is truly no one better than His Excellency to shine a light on the vision for this relationship. We at the Center hope this session is the first in a series of engagements that further explore the avenues of India-UAE collaboration. We look forward to working with His Excellency in this pursuit. I'm delighted to also welcome Mr. K.P. Nair, who we all know as a renowned columnist and strategic analyst. Mr. Nair's association with the UAE began in 1978, when he, along with a multinational team of 7 other journalists, launched Dubai's first newspaper, the Khalij Times. He now represents the UAE's official news agency. Mr. Nair is a regular participant and speaker in Track 1.5 and Track 2 conferences in the Gulf, such as the Manama Dialogue, the region's biggest annual international security and diplomatic summit, and its associated meetings. Mr. Nair, thank you very much for being with us today and chairing this important session. It is a pleasure to have you with us as always. A request to all of our viewers before we begin. Please send in your questions throughout the course of this discussion instead of waiting till the end. The questions can be sent in via the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screens or via the comment section of Facebook. With this, over to you, Mr. Nair. Thank you.
Thank you, Prerna. Good afternoon, Ambassador. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you may be, watching the latest in the Ananta Center's Ambassador Series with His Excellency Dr. Ahmed Albanna, Ambassador of the United Arab Emirates to India. Thank you all for joining us. It is pro forma and said by rote at the beginning of such events, what a pleasure it is to chair a session with a chief guest or a speaker. However, for me personally, this is a very special event which transcends such hyperbole, a unique event in a manner of speaking, a true watershed in my 4-decade-long association with Dr. Albanna. I first met him 41 years ago, soon after he returned home to Dubai with a graduate degree from American University in Washington, D.C. One morning, I walked into my daily professional port of call, the Dubai Chamber of Commerce, and right next to the Director General's office was a new face with a neatly trimmed beard that I envied, as someone with a straggly and unkempt beard as I have. He was in crisp white national dress that Emiratis usually wear, and was welcoming even before I was introduced to Dr. Albanna. Since I have only 5 minutes left, since I have only 5 minutes of our tight schedule, I shall confine myself to saying that in the next 21 years, in various roles in the chamber, he changed how commerce is done in Dubai. Dubai was a thriving entrepot, even in the 1980s, but business was done mostly on trust. I have seen contracts that are no more than a piece of small notepaper signed by the contracting parties. With best practices that he picked up from the US, Dr. Albanna began a process which has made Dubai a preeminent trading post in the world today. All of you have his CV. It has been circulated by Ananta Center. So I will mention only 2 things that you will not find in any bio of the ambassador. He is like a doctor of the medical variety, although his PhD is from Hull University and it's in international economics. Medical doctors have to compulsorily undergo CME, continuing medical education, like Airline pilots have to go back to simulators to upgrade their skills from time to time. Diplomats don't have to do any such thing. In India, Shiv Shankar Menon, when he was foreign secretary, made some refresher courses compulsory for promotions, but even that leaves much to be desired. But Dr. Albanna regularly goes back to diplomatic schools. He was recently at as far as I know, two such very prestigious institutions in the US, polishing up his diplomatic skills. The other unknown that I will mention is that at a recent meeting of UAE ambassadors from all over the world, a competition was held on public diplomacy, how best ambassadors should deal with the media. The winner of that competition was His Excellency Dr. Ahmed A R Albanna. I am asked worldwide in the course of my work with the Emirati media how the UAE has such a good international profile. It is because UAE diplomats like Dr. Albanna have a positive and creative approach to the media, that their country is viewed positively everywhere. UAE diplomats are never hostile to the media. Well, chairpersons often usurp the role of the speaker and tend to talk about the subject of the day instead of letting the main guest do this job. So I will only say this about India-UAE relations, that Dr. Albanna's tenure in New Delhi coincided with the biggest expansion in bilateral relations, in relations between India and the UAE, since Indira Gandhi's visit to Abu Dhabi and Dubai in 1981. A very warm welcome to you, Excellency. The floor is yours to break new ground in India-UAE relations to this audience.
Thank you. Thank you very much, KP, for your for the nice words and yes, we have known each other for a long time, but I'm not gonna be like you to reveal it and say 41 years. I would say only maybe long time. So, anyways, I'm very I appreciate the nice words you have said, and yes, UAE is striving. And UAE for some times have been trying on the regional level to create a different status for the United Arab Emirates. And with the work and with the vision of our leadership, I think that sort of gotten us on the right track, and we're trying our best to strive more and more day after day to improve. There is nothing called, that's it, I made it. You never make, or you never reach to your goal. You may reach to a goal, but then there are so many other goals, and you plan yourself and you plan your goals accordingly. Anyways, having said that, let me, before that, Excellencies, colleagues, esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to take a moment to thank Ananta Center for inviting me today to share my views. And it is a pleasure to engage with the audience here. And it's a pleasure also to engage with our Master of Ceremony, or my colleague, my friend, KP Nair. And, you know, at certain times, I would say he knows about UAE maybe more than I do. Anyways, much of the world has changed since the pandemic began. We are in uncharted territory and need now new navigation tools to collectively deal with possibly the worst pandemic of the century. On one hand, I think countries devise ways and means of self-reliance and self-substance, while on the other hand, the unprecedented times also made countries realize the power of economic and strategic alliances. Allow me to share with you my views on the present contours of the dynamic partnership between the United Arab Emirates and India. I will navigate through the main important elements and sectors, and I will maybe at certain times take certain examples of that. Despite the challenging time, the UAE-India bilateral relationship have shown tremendous resilience, and the partnership has in fact strengthened since the pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, UAE is one of the cusp of economic transformation powered by twin pillars: innovation and diversification. Strategic partnership with key economic partners are vital and will help our economy in smooth economic transition towards attaining sustainable economic development. We treasure our partnership with India, our bilateral partnership traditionally dominated by energy, trade, and expatriates, people to people. In recent times, we have witnessed that cooperation deepening in new strategic sectors, such as defense, security, cybersecurity, food security, healthcare, sophisticated technology such as artificial intelligence and blockchain, cultural cooperation, and many other sectors. Eventually, in my speech, I may touch on some other important sectors also. In terms of energy, the UAE stands as India's committed partner for its energy needs. The UAE is the only foreign partner in India's strategic. The UAE is the only foreign partner in India's strategic reserve. We are also working together closely on renewables. In terms of trade, the UAE stood the third largest trade partner for the 8th consecutive year in 2020-2021. The bilateral trade, if we look at not too far ago, in the 80s, 1985 maybe, the bilateral trade India-UAE was around $180 million. And that is the non-oil trade I'm referring to. In 2020, 2021, that amount reached to above $43 billion. Of course, the total foreign trade India-UAE is about $60 billion. It is my firm belief that comprehensive economic partnership agreement between our two countries, once formalized and finalized and signed, would unleash the golden era in our bilateral partnership. The agreement, when signed and implemented, will boost investment, trade, and technological partnership and create employment opportunities across many different sectors. We are one of the largest investors in India, with about over 18 billion cumulative investment in India, including about 11 billion in a form of cumulative FDI equity flows. The FDI equity flows from the UAE into India increased by more than 1,000% only during last year. The 2020 was in the range of $339 million, and 2021 reached to $4.2 billion. Not forgetting the commitment that was made in 2017 by the UAE of creating a fund of $75 billion, along with the Ministry of Finance under the umbrella of NIIF, for strategic infrastructural projects that takes place in India. I'm sure these numbers speaks volumes of our confidence in India's growth story. The UAE stands committed as a trusted partner of India in realizing the Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi's vision of taking India's economy to be a $5 trillion economy by 2025. Another pillar of our relationship is the Indian diaspora in the United Arab Emirates, which is considered to be the largest in the world. More than 3.4 million Indians live in the UAE harmoniously. And again, I should note this also, that the Indian community, the Indian businessmen, the Indian diaspora overall from different sectors, they were an important part of supporting the UAE growth. And they played an important part, and we appreciate those efforts, and seeing where the UAE overall is now in comparison to what it was maybe 20 years ago or 40 years ago. The Indian diaspora played a pivotal role in the socio-economic fabrics of the UAE, and it is probably the most dynamic aspects of our bilateral relationship. The consecutive visits, of course, of our leadership. I do recall the first visit of Prime Minister Modi in August 2015. Of course, as KP mentioned, in 1981, that was the last Prime Minister visited, Indira Gandhi visited the UAE, and that was in 1981. And since then, there was no PM visit to the United Arab Emirates until 2015, where Prime Minister Modi visited the UAE, and then again 2 other visits after that in 2018 and 2019. And the visits from our side, His Highness visit, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Deputy Chief Commander of the UAE Armed Forces. He visited India in 2016. It was a big, huge visit with a big, huge delegation. and of course, again in 2017, being a chief guest of India Republic Day. And on that day also, hundreds, more than 13 agreements actually we have signed, and it was crowned by what we call comprehensive strategic partnership agreement. Our two countries remain committed to joint climate action, which will be strengthened by UAE hosting the COP28 in 2023. Ladies and gentlemen, the UAE has been a symbol of what can be achieved through collaboration. It has been a beacon of innovation and inspiration. The visionary thinking of our leaders placed the UAE ahead of the curve, and the country is often regarded the country of many firsts. Our economy has time and again displayed a unique resilience to withstand most challenging economic times. As a country that constantly looks forward, we have taken steps for a better and brighter future of our country and the wider region. Speaking which, I am sure you would all agree with me that the signing of this historic Abraham Accord has opened up new opportunities for our own bilaterals with the State of Israel, but also the trilateral strategic cooperation between the United Arab Emirates, India, and Israel, specifically in the trade, investment, technology, and security. The newly formed West Asian Quad between the United Arab Emirates, India, Israel, and the United States of America is an offspring actually of the Abraham Accord and of the actual trilateral UAE, India, Israel. I firmly believe that the multilateral approach is more critical than ever to respond to increasingly complex threats to global economic growth and stability. Globally, as a business show their confidence in the UAE economy, forward-looking policies such as granting UAE passports for certain individuals who have stayed and lived and been part of the growth of the UAE, and the issuance of the golden visas and retirement visas and full foreign ownership in the mainland will go a long way in further augmenting the investors' confidence. With such futuristic policies and a passion for excellence and innovation, I strongly believe that the time is ripe now more than ever for global business to step into the United Arab Emirates and leverage from its strategic location, well-developed infrastructure, excellent connectivities, stable political system, investor-friendly policies, and overall ease of doing business. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you would all agree with me again that the current global pandemic situation has made business and personal interactions digital. Technological collaboration is one area where I see our bilateral partnership with India growing significantly. I believe that a new narrative of openness, opportunity, and optimism is possible. I look forward to engaging with all of you and invite you all to experience the United Arab Emirates. And as you all know, that the UAE has hosted the Expo 2020. It was supposed to open in October 2020, but during to the pandemic, it was postponed till October 2021. And since then, there has been the Expo and the organizing of the Expo and the numbers of visitors of the Expo and the numbers of high official visits of the Expo has been incredible. Maybe I need also to emphasize on a couple of small things in terms of, I mentioned before, climate actions and renewables, emerging technologies I mentioned. I should also mention the skill development cooperation, one of the sectors that the UAE is working very closely with India on, and of course, the health and education collaboration, and the overall political consultation collaboration. UAE, India, as I mentioned earlier, due to the vision of our leadership in the United Arab Emirates and in India, has taken steps, great, huge steps to make sure that that relationship, as I mentioned, has ripened and it is growing and it will be ongoing, not growing only, but ongoing. I'm not gonna go any longer. I'll once again, I need to thank Ananta Center for having me here on their ambassadors series. And I thank all the people who worked behind the screen to make today's virtual gathering possible. And last but not least, I thank my brother and my friend KP for arranging and for being part of this. I thank you all very much and wish you wellness and health. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. That is what I call a PowerPoint presentation without the PowerPoint program. What I mean is that it was both powerful and to the point. After listening to you, I want to pick up from where I left off in my opening remarks. Indira Gandhi was the pioneer of India's relations, not only with the UAE, but the entire Gulf. Not many of you will remember her historic visits to the UAE. I mean, not many of you in the audience will remember her historic visits to the UAE and Kuwait in 1981 and to Saudi Arabia the following year. I was privileged to be part of those visits. There are some I see in the audience who are also part of India's first Gulf initiative at that time. I see in the audience Lata Jishnu, for example. She also knew the ambassador in the 1980s in Dubai. I see Ambassador Divya Manchanda, who as a bright young diplomat at our embassy in Abu Dhabi had to pick up the threads of where Indira Gandhi initiated the relationship with the UAE. I see Ambassador S.K. Bhatnagar. I always, at parties, I always try to pull him away so that he tells me the stories about UAE in the 1970s. Soon after India opened the embassy in Abu Dhabi in 1972. And he has told me so many stories about how he stood with Sheikh Zayed, who used to come in a jeep driving himself and plant trees in Abu Dhabi because of his passion for the environment at a time when most people did not know how to spell the word environment. No? So apart from these people, I suspect that even fewer people will remember that the very first time India became open to foreign investment was through a special vehicle for investments initiated during Indira Gandhi's visit to the Gulf, which made India open to investments from oil exporting developing countries, such as the UAE. So, Dr. Albanna, I want to ask you, why did Indira Gandhi's Gulf initiatives not achieve the desired results, even though she had an excellent personal rapport with several leaders in the Gulf through the non-aligned movement and other avenues? Whereas these similar initiatives are succeeding today. And why are they succeeding today? In the last 6 years, especially, making UAE one of India's most important foreign policy priorities. What is the difference? Is possible?
Well, I frankly wouldn't say that Indira Gandhi's, the late Indira Gandhi's visit to the UAE in 1981, that the results of her visit was not there or no one could see. I would say yes, it was there, and that is what I always mention: people to people. The Indian diaspora in the UAE. The visit opened a lot of opportunities for Indians to look at the United Arab Emirates and to come to United Arab Emirates and to migrate in certain ways to the UAE and to become NRIs in the UAE. Now, having said that, the time 1981 is different than 1990, and 1990 is different than the 2000, and now we are in 2022. So the vision at that time there was nothing called renewable energy, or there was nothing called in terms of our knowledge, cyber security and whatever. Maybe there was, but it was on a very limited matters. But yes, there was maybe at certain times a disconnect, but nevertheless, the traditional sectors was always there. As I mentioned, oil and energy was always part of the India-UAE bilaterals since the inception of UAE, 1971. The trade, the foreign trade. India was a major trading partner for the United Arab Emirates. A lot of goods and services used to be imported from India, not only for the United Arab Emirates, but for the whole region. So the traditional sectors were there. Some of the new sectors, maybe at that time it was not there, but since 2000, I would say since 2015, I came to India in a post of UAE ambassador in January 2016. I've been there now for more than 6 years, about 6 years plus. I have seen a major diversification. I have seen a major growth on the new sectors, on the new bilaterals, be it aerospace, as I mentioned, cybersecurity, renewables, advanced technology, manufacturing, and so on and so on, artificial intelligence, and the commitment. I think we see India as a strategic partner, and India sees us also in the whole region. There are other countries in the region. India values that relationship and values our vision to India as a strategic partner. So we are getting the same in return. And I hope for even expanding that, our own bilateral, or even through what we call a quad or a trilateral platforms that we have created lately. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I want to go back to one very important point that you mentioned in your address, which is the question of UAE investments in India. A lot of people, as you know, are very much interested in this aspect. When bilateral relations began to transform from a buyer-seller arrangement of convenience to a comprehensive economic partnership and a robust strategic partnership, the UAE, as you mentioned, committed to invest $75 billion in India, mainly in infrastructure projects, which India needs. A retired Indian ambassador recently wrote, quite erroneously, I'm afraid, that not even a single dirham of that money has seen the light of day, and dismissed the idea that such investments would materialize. How would you deal with such pessimists? How would you answer such pessimism? And more importantly, how do you envisage future investments taking place beyond what you mentioned has already taken place?
Well, I don't know who that ambassador is, or where he got his information from, but the information is available. It is with NIIF, and you know, we all can go back and find out what has been pumped under the NIIF $75 billion from the UAE funds, and also from some other private funds. I mentioned in my speech that during the pandemic, 2019 and 2020 and 2020-2022, there was more than $3.2 billion that has been invested. And it was all over the newspaper. It is all over, you know, the economic news and all that. So maybe I suggest to our friend who have mentioned that or said that, I suggest that my doors are open. I can sit with him and explain to him and give him all the information he needs. Or he can go back to the media and to the official sites or records to find out how much of that has been invested in India. Now, yes, there are new sectors, and I did touch on some of the sectors in terms of emerging technologies, in terms of air and space, in terms of energy partnership, and the new formats. These are some of the sectors that the UAE is looking at very carefully, and they are coming in and investing. As a matter of fact, not only that, I can give you an example of only a month ago, there has been some announcement from UAE companies, especially DP World and Emaar, and investing in certain parts of India, be it Jammu Kashmir, be it Punjab, be it many other states. So this is an ongoing process, and it is there, and no one can deny it. Thank you.
I have a few more minutes of my allotted time for the conversation with the ambassador, but there is the flood of questions from the audience. So as they say in the US Senate, I yield my time for the time being. And I would now like to take up some of the questions from the audience. The largest number of questions are about the comprehensive economic partnership agreement that is under negotiation between India and the UAE, because I think it is understandable that in India and in the UAE, people expect the CEPA to benefit both sides. So the crux of these questions is, when should we expect the comprehensive economic partnership agreement to be finalized and signed? What are the hopes from this pact? Which parts of the trade relationship do you expect will benefit most from the CEPA?
Well, the CEPA, Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, we started the actual negotiation in October, I would say. And by end December, our team of negotiators, both from the UAE side and India side, had finalized the agreement and agreed on all the elements of the agreement. I should mention one thing that is very important. Signing a CEPA, signing a major trade agreement, usually it takes countries months and months, if not years and years. Any CEPA agreement could not be concluded in less than a year or 2 years. We concluded a CEPA agreement with India in less than 4 months' time. So that shows the immense interest from both sides of trying to reach to a final CEPA agreement, which will benefit the economies of both the United Arab Emirates and India in many different sectors. In the manufacturing sector, it will have a positive effect, as I mentioned in my speech earlier, on the unemployment. It will have a positive, strong effect on the trade, import, export, re-export, and the different products under the different categories, and so on and so on. It will affect the flow of investment positively. It will create a corridor, a one-zone corridor for India in the UAE and for the UAE in India. So therefore, it promotes a two-way investment, trade, manufacturing, and the service industry in terms of the hospitality industry, in terms of building the hotels, in terms of other hospitality industries supported to the main hospitality industry, the hotel and tourism, and so on and so on. So the effect will be immense. And what we are planning is very soon it will be signed and it will be implemented. The approvals are there already. And we're just waiting for the final leadership signal from both sides to conclude and sign the agreement. Then we are planning to have an actual joint communique that explains all the benefits. When I said communique, I didn't mean only in writing format, but also in terms of interacting with the press, interacting with the different industries, different sectors, to show them what are the benefits that will both the countries will gain, and the positive results on the economies of both countries, the United Arab Emirates and India.
Quite understandably, there are several questions about the energy partnership between India and the UAE. And most of the questions are about the stake by state-owned Indian oil and gas companies in the Zakum oil field, which is the first Indian investment in the upstream oil sector in the UAE. Now, Ambassador, what is your vision for the future of bilateral cooperation in the energy sector? To the audience question, I would also like to add from my side what you could say about the strategic oil reserves, because that is expanding in a big way, I understand.
Well, that is true. The importance of the energy sector. You mentioned about the Indian investment in the UAE in Abu Dhabi in the upstream sector, and also the investment of the UAE and the petroleum reserve infrastructure that we have created with India a couple of years back. I think it is very important that under that we look at the both sides look at what we call new technologies, enhancing energy efficiency. We have energy, but it is very important also to look at new technologies to enhance that efficiency on a long-term base, whether upstream, whether downstream. The advanced technology is very, very important in the sector of energy and the downstream and the upstream sectors.
Well, here is a question which I'm afraid I don't understand, because it relates to technology. And since two people have raised this question, I think I should put it to the ambassador. Can UAE invest in India's initiative of setting up FAB for manufacture of silicon chips for the next generation technology for the benefit of India and UAE for the growth of next generation technologies?
Very simply, the answer is yes, of course. You know, the blue chip industry, the blockchain involved in that is quite important, and this is the future. And we do need to look into that and look at, number one, on the very first level, the startups and the unicorns in the field of blue chip industry, and try to develop that and try to sponsor that jointly and try to advance that and try to be one of the main players in the blue chip industry, and to look at, as I said, increase whatever I mentioned in reference to the oil and gas upstream and downstream, but also it is important to look at that in the other sectors, be it renewable, be it solar, or be it the blue chip industry, to enhance the efficiency of the blue chip industry. Thank you.
Since I yielded back my time earlier, I would like to take it back and ask one question that is of particular interest to me personally. With COVID-19 and Omicron infections clearly on the decline, with only 50 days left for Expo 2020 Dubai, the glorious weather in the Gulf ending soon, how do you see the people-to-people interaction between our two countries in the very short run, in the immediate short run? I ask this question because there are not enough flights at the moment to accommodate the demand from Indians who want to go to the UAE. Ticket costs are rising, and the air services agreement between India and the UAE is no longer worth the paper it's signed on, I'm afraid. What does the UAE want from India in terms of improving connectivity, especially air connectivity, at this point of revival in the movement of people between India and the
Well, you brought up 2 points, which is very close to my heart. One is the connectivity, people and airline and air service agreement, and one is people to people, cultural interaction, cultural diplomacy, and the actual overall interaction. The big, huge diaspora of Indians living in the UAE, 3.4 or even more. They have to be at ease whenever they want to travel to India, to their own hometowns, to their own families, to get together with their own, people there. Creating restrictions or certain restrictions will affect them for sure. Now, creating restrictions to protect maybe 10% or not even 10%, 1% on the account of 90 or 99%, this is just unacceptable. Now, yes, we know we went through a major difficulty, but during the pandemic, that is, I'm talking about, and our air service agreement, even before the pandemic, was suffering. And we were calling for extra capacities, extra seat capacities. More than 10 years passed, and a very important clause in the air service agreement, it stipulates that if the capacities of all carriers from both sides reaches 85%, then it is a must for both countries to sit and renegotiate the capacities. Renegotiate means to increase it. Naturally, if it has reached to 85%, naturally then we need to increase. That we have been trying with the authorities in India because we thought it is very important that movement of people and movements of goods, those aircrafts, they not only carry people, but they also carry goods. So that we never received any sort of positive response due to so many reasons. We have been told so many reasons, nothing solid. We have enough facts and figures to show the authorities in the civil aviation sector of India that opening up, having more capacities, and even reaching to what we call open sky, and even reaching to what we call sixth freedom, it will be beneficial to the economy. It will be an added value to the economy, looking at the multiplier effects of doing that in comparison to looking at only maybe the loss of 5 or 6% of the whole industry. So then, of course, the pandemic hit and the air service agreement was put aside, and UAE enjoyed what we call an air bubble agreement with India. The whole concept of air bubble agreement is to have the capacities open This is what we were told from day one, but that's not the case. The capacities are open only up to the level of what Indian carriers carry one way from India into UAE. That to us, to the UAE national carriers, don't make any sense and any logic. And we have tried, of course, to explain by figures also in terms of some of the worrisome that the Indian authorities or the Indian carriers had in reference to what we call beyond, not point to point, but beyond. Beyond, the sixth freedom is involved, and there is no effect at all. And if there is, it is very, very minimal to the airline or Indian national airlines or airlines operating in India. So yes, it is time to review that, to review our air service agreement. Our air service agreement is one air service agreement between UAE and India. Our UAE Civil Aviation Authority is in charge from one side, and India Civil Aviation Ministry is in charge from the other side. But under that air service agreement, we have 4 sectorials. And those sectorials, which is India, Dubai, India, Abu Dhabi, India, Sharjah, those need to be looked at, and the numbers not only have reached 85, it has reached 100%, because the prices of traveling is increasing and it's going so high because very simple economic model, and that is law of demand and supply. When there is no supply at all and the demand is high, prices goes up. So we hope that the Indian authorities, we hope that the people in the air sector and the air transport sector, be it cargo, be it passengers, they need to work very closely with us and to seek the overall economic benefits to India in comparison to looking at only one sector benefit where we are losing 90 on account of 5 or 10%. Thank you.
Well, I have a dozen questions from the audience, but unfortunately, we have run completely out of time, and my chat box is full of messages complimenting the ambassador on his presentation, all of which I think is testimony to the great interest in India in the relationship with the UAE. So since we have completely run out of time, I would like to thank His Excellency Dr. Ahmed A R Albanna for spending time with us and for a detailed and very exhilarating presentation on the relationship between our two countries. Thank you. I would also like to thank the audience and the people who sent in the questions, especially those whose questions could not be answered for want of time. And I would also like to thank some of the veterans of Indo-UAE relationship, former ambassadors, several members of the media who write regularly on the Gulf, for having attended this session. I hope, Ambassador, you will come back to us again later on as our relationship grows. And to the audience, I hope you will continue to tune in for similar programs and the Ambassador series. Thank you all very much.
We will do a special section on the benefits of CEPA with you guys. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.